Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I promise this is the last obscure expanded universe related content that I'm going to be reviewing for now. I know these reviews are not as popular as some of my other reviews, considering that a lot of these stories cannot be bought easily because they're out of print and there's no way to buy them digitally. But I don't think I can do the Clone Wars timeline justice without reviewing these because I think it's it'll be an injustice if I review all that garbage from TCW but not review stuff related to the micro series and I'm going to review them. The Clone Wars Adventures, 10 volumes. This series went on um, up until 2007, 2 years after the series ended, and a year before TCW came out. Now, since these are all over the place when it comes to the Clone Wars timeline, I'm not saying this to criticize them. I'm saying that because it's the honest truth. The first half of them take place. It's easy to place them, but the second half, they're all over the place in terms of the timeline. So it'd be very difficult to if you were to read this in chronological order because some volumes would take place at the later ones take place towards the very beginning of the Clone Wars, but then you have a story that takes place after Order 66. So I'm going to be reviewing these as the whole series, not individually. I originally was going to do that, but I saw the content and there isn't enough material in any of these comics for me to do a review. I mean, and dragging this timeline on for another 10 episodes is too much because the Revenge of the Sith novelization, I want that to get reviewed before the year is over. So, without further ado, let's begin on the Clone Wars Adventures. I'm going to talk about the volumes individually, with my quick thoughts on each story, and I'm not going to mention the art very much, which is another reason I'm doing this in one video, because I'd be repeating myself. Now, the first volume in the series, which features 3 stories, I think the art overall is pretty good. I think the stories are pretty fun. The first one with Obi-Wan and Anakin, I think, is a really fun story. I mean, Obi-Wan and Anakin, I could use more of them. And of course, the second story is Mace Windu. But I'm just going to show you the art. I think this does a great job of capturing the style of the micro series. This feels like an actual tie-in to it. And of course, the second one, brilliant artwork too. I think I'm not going to mention the story very much, but I think the last one's my favorite of this volume because Kit Fisto, I would love to have a drink with him if he ever existed. I mean, the guy's always happy for some reason. And considering that there's barely any stories with this character, the reason this one's my favorite in the volume because Kit Fisto is barely featured in EU stories, and not to mention the artwork is really good. At times, I feel like I'm watching an episode of the micro series, and I think this does a good job of capturing that style. Volume 1 does a pretty good job, and the writer for these stories, at least for the first one, I'm not going to mention it for all of them, just Heaton Blackman did the script for all of these. If you know anything about the EU, you know who Heaton Blackman is. I don't need to introduce him, but pretty good volume, pretty fun. Volume 2, I'm just letting you know the earlier stories, in these volumes, there's 3. The later ones have 4. And okay, of course, in this one, we get a glimpse of what Darth Vader would look like in the micro series. The first story, at least the prologue, takes place during A New Hope, and of course, there's some pretty awesome moments. Again, the artwork captures the micro series perfectly. And I think Anakin has some pretty cool moments in here. Oh man, I just love the art for this. I know this is not everyone's cup of tea. I understand that, the micro series, but in comic book form, it translates beautifully. And I think one of the coolest moments, in my opinion, is just seeing Anakin like jumping from one ship to another, and I think it's pretty badass. I just love is how, it tells, these stories with barely any dialogue. It does it in the exact same style as the series. And Darth Vader in the micro series style looks awesome. I really wish there was a Black Series figure of that. I'm not gonna lie, I think the earlier comics, I think artwork is superior to the later ones because it captures the feel of the micro series. And of course, this short story is actually referenced in the EU. Yes, some of these are referenced, believe it or not. And that's pretty cool. In Hide in Plain Sight, this story was actually referenced in the EU, and that's awesome. I mean, even obscure source of this being referenced. In a short story that focuses on Mace Windu, I thought it was a pretty cool story as well. Now, Volume 3 has one of the coolest moments in freaking Star Wars history, and I don't know if I should spoil it, but it's pretty badass. And there's a story in here that actually has General Grievous fight Dirge and Asajj Ventress and make them look like complete children. And I think this story is pretty damn awesome. It really is. I think the artwork is pretty good in this as well, which is not a surprise. These early, Clone Wars, stories, I think have really good artwork. Of course, in this one is one of the most badass moments in Star Wars history. I mean, Yoda having a freaking Gatling gun, essentially, is freaking badass. Of course, I try not to damage this, because this particular volume that I have in my possession is not necessarily in the best condition. This story was pretty awesome. I really enjoyed it. My favorite, probably, out of all of them. Because, come on, who would think Yoda using a Gatling gun? The last story, the artwork is not as good as the rest, but it's pretty fun. This story is a story with 3PO and R2-D2. It's pretty funny, I will admit. I mean, this is supposed to be a humorous story, which I don't mind that once in a while. As long as it's not obnoxious like TCW is with its 3PO and R2-D2 centric episodes. A pretty fun story about the trouble that 3PO and R2-D2 get themselves in. And another Anakin Obi-Wan story, and it's actually another fun little story. Now, I do wish they would have stuck to 3 stories, because I feel like cramming 4 stories in these volumes, I feel like the quality of the stories went down, and same thing with the artwork, at least in the later volumes, not in these ones. Of course, there's a character that looks like a character from Knights of the Old Republic in here. Anakin's hair color, I don't know why. Even though his hair's not supposed to be that color, at least in the micro series style. And of course, there's a story about Order 66. The art is it's taking a little dive in here, but it's still good. Though I'm not gonna lie, I think there's a little too many stories in this with Order 66 in here. And there's one with the Wookiees. This takes place during Order 66. That's why I'm saying that these kind of take place all over the Clone Wars timeline, during and after Revenge of the Sith, at least in the earlier ones. The second half takes place anywhere in the timeline, possibly, except if it's Obi-Wan and Anakin. It's obvious where it takes place. There's a Air Secura story that takes place on Endor. I thought that was pretty fun to read through. Now, I don't consider these amazing stories. I just think they're fun, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I like the visual aspect of these. I'm just going to get through another story. There's one where Bail Organa is rescuing Shaak Ti. I think another story that's, it's not, the most amazing story, but I consider it, in the spirit of the micro series. Like, I didn't even know any of these existed, and I think the best story in this volume is Heroes on Both Sides, which shows how far the Confederacy and the Republic are willing to go to achieve their objectives. I think for, the amount of content there is, I think this is told well with the visuals alone. That it shows that not everything is black and white. And this is why this era, excluding TCW, has become my second favorite because of this. And of course, another generic Order 66 story. I'm sorry. There's way too many. I feel like there's way too many of these stories, already. Like 2 of them, come on. The micro series is supposed to take place, during the Clone Wars, and it's really jarring when you have stories that take place after Order 66. I don't mind during it, but yeah, and then I feel like this is when the quality starts to drop for these in terms of art and stories, because I feel like this is where the problems, start to present themselves of having too many stories in one volume. They should have stuck to 3. And of course, the art takes a nose dive in here. I mean, it's not terrible, but it doesn't resemble the micro series like the first 5 volumes do. And I feel like the stories, are kind of generic. I mean, this one, I hate the artwork in here. It doesn't really look like the micro series. It felt like whoever drew this never saw the series. And the thing I really like about these comics are, at least the ones I like, are the ones that resemble the micro series. I think this story is pretty good, these artwork wise. This is exactly why I'm doing this in one review, because I bring up the art a lot. But I think, considering that TCW is a series that you know what I mean. Clone Wars 2003 tells its story through the visuals. That bring up the art is relevant because most of these stories are told through the visuals, and I think this story was pretty good, at least for what little time they had to tell it. And the Jedi that actually stopped that, Star Destroyer, whatever you want to call that thing, the Clone Wars ship, whatever, she actually died in the process. So it wasn't like she, was able to do insane feats and not actually suffer the consequences for it. And of course, this unholy abomination. This is possibly the worst artwork I've seen in this entire comic series, and not to mention one of the worst comics in Star Wars. I mean, this unholy abomination. Not only does this not look like the micro series, but this is one of the worst comic artwork in Star Wars ever. I mean, these characters don't even. I mean, Kit Fisto doesn't even look right near this Plo-Koon, and the story itself is pretty bad. Yeah, this is when you start seeing the quality drop, unfortunately. I do enjoy the series, but the quality is objectively not as good as, the first 5. Of course, there is a little fun story with Obi-Wan and Anakin. So, you can place this before Revenge of the Sith. I think the artwork is pretty good for this. It captures the feel of the micro series again. And then you have one of the rare stories that features Padme Amidala, Spy Girls. It's like, Jesus, this sounds like something from one of those teenage freaking movies. Kind of stupid. The story is, well, what can I say? It's a really short story. I can't really criticize it. I think it's a fun little story, though nothing amazing. And, well, Padme looks more like Leia than she does Padme. I don't know why her hair is kind of a reddish brown when Padme's hair is brown. Whatever. It's capturing the style of, the Blanco series, so I guess I'll give it credit for that. Now, this is probably one of my favorite stories, because this reminds me of an episode of Samurai Jack, this particular one. I mean, the visual style. I mean, I really love the artwork. Most of the dialogue is the villain, so we get nothing from the main character of the story. But I consider it really fun. And yeah, I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I think that I consider this like the Samurai Jack-ish kind of style in terms of Star Wars. Now, oh god, the last story in this volume is about a bunch of thieves wanting to escape their hellhole of a planet because of the Clone Wars. And to be honest with you, this story is kind of a little generic, though at least the artwork looks like the micro series. It's a little fun story, but nothing amazing. This is probably my favorite volume of the whole series because I think every story of this is solid. The first one is Barriss, Ophi's master, Luminara, fighting a few creatures and a droid without the use of the Force or her lightsaber, and I think that's pretty badass. And I think the ending is pretty funny in a way, considering how much the Hutt gets screwed over. Now another story, which takes place early in the Clone Wars, is Aurra Sing. And, well, let's just say you don't fuck with Aurra Sing, because bad things happen. And the artwork is pretty damn good. Now, I think it's nice when they use up characters that are barely featured in the Star Wars universe, and seeing her do a bunch of cool stuff in here, this makes her look like a badass. I think this is a pretty good story in my opinion. Now, One of a Kind, I think, is probably the best story of the whole comics, because for the short amount of time that we're given in this story, it gives us a backstory of the character, at least that's introduced in here, and I think it does an amazing job doing it through the visuals. Now, do I want to spoil it? No, I won't. But it also is one of the times that kind of exposes the hypocrisy of the Jedi, so I think that's good. A little dark for Clone Wars 2003. These are the comics. Another good story, I think, is this particular one, which focuses on a battle droid that becomes self-aware and doesn't want to fight in the Clone Wars anymore and wants to defect. And despite the fact that, this is a very short story, you can't help but feel bad for the droid. Because the droid, doesn't want to fight in the Clone Wars anymore, be a slave. And, well, I'm not going to tell you the ending. I think it's a good story. This is why these 4 stories in here, I think, are the reason why this is my favorite volume of the whole series. This one was a disappointment, unfortunately. You figure that introducing Quinlan Vos would be awesome. I know I'm a Quinlan Vos fan. I love the character. I think he's amazing. I think he's well written. I think well, this particular story is the one that literally has no dialogue until the end. I think it's kind of funny in a way. But whatever. Savage is another one of those stories that takes place after Order 66. And to be honest, not a fan. I'm kind of rushing through this because I consider this particular volume a disappointment. Quinlan Vos should be an awesome freaking story, but honestly, it's very generic. I mean, Quinlan Vos is one of the most well-written characters in this era, if not the most well-written, and I feel like this comic didn't do him justice. Another story, another one with Mace Windu. Again, it feels like they didn't know what to do with Mace Windu, so they just gave him another generic story. The art is not too bad, but whatever. If I'm sounding negative towards the last ones, because, well, I think the first 5 volumes were so good that I feel like, the later ones, I feel like the quality is lower. Flagellation Day, it's just focused out on a bunch of kids that, didn't quite make the cut for the Jedi Order. I don't really care because they're no-name characters. Another Obi-Wan and Anakin story. I enjoyed this one, and it showed, how much Anakin loves machines, though he got Anakin's hair color completely wrong. But it's a fun little story. I did enjoy it. And another story that focused on another character that looks like one of those characters from one of those Nickelodeon cartoons or Cartoon Network back in the early 2000s. It's a fun little story. I enjoyed it, despite the character only appearing in one of these stories. And now the last one. To be honest, this is not how I imagined this series ending. I mean, it's a fun comedic story with a clone trooper, dealing with the natives on the planet, and after completing his mission, he chases the creature at the end. Not a bad story, but not a way I wanted to end this series, based on one of my favorite cartoons of the 2000s. Now, sorry if I kind of rushed through each of these stories, but to be honest, I would be here for an hour, and I don't have an hour to talk about all these stories individually. I don't think you guys want to hear it. I just want to give a bit of a summary on what I think of each of these volumes, these stories. The Clone Wars Adventures was a fun time, despite the fact I think the series does go downhill, about halfway through it. I feel like the first 5 volumes I think are excellent, great artwork. The stories are the best in those volumes, and I felt like because there's only 3 stories in the earlier volumes, and only like at volume 4 and 5 onwards they added 4, I felt like it became a detriment later on because it felt like, it was quantity over quality, and I think that they should have stuck the 3 stories throughout the whole thing, because I felt like having 3 short stories instead of 2, 4 would have been better. But I think these comics do a great job of capturing the spirit for most of these volumes of the micro series. This feels like, the people who made these comics actually respected the material and actually watched it and actually enjoyed writing these stories for it. It felt like they actually, genuinely enjoyed doing these. Unlike the TCW comics, graphic novels that were released, that pretty much feel like cash grabs that you could easily throw in a dumpster and pretty much forget about them. I think these, despite the fact I think there's better Clone Wars stories in this era, are enjoyable. I think they're a fun read. Would I track them down and spend like hundreds of dollars on these? No, I wouldn't. I don't think they're quite worth that much. But if you can get them for a reasonable price, maybe get a whole set for 60 or 50 or 40 bucks, I think they're worth it. Though, if you don't want to spend that much on obscure expanded universe comics, I probably would find a way to read them for free. I mean, you could easily do that. I don't endorse piracy normally, but these comics have been out of print for over a decade. And I don't see Lucasfilm reprinting these anytime soon. Or even the TCW graphic novels. So, you want some more Star Wars content or more, content in the Clone Wars era, pre-TCW, I would recommend these. I would probably give these a good rating. They're not great, they're not quite classics, but I think they're definitely worth at least one read. Especially some of those stories I showed you. Anyway, this is Darcenovia, over and out. May the Force be with you. And next time, I have another comic I'm going to review that features Quinlan Vos.